Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I think what's quite interesting, you've heard about alternate therapies combined with other treatments. I'm going to talk to you even wider than that. I'm going to talk to you about alternate treatments, conventional treatment, and how your mind and body are connected actually on the journey you're on. And as Wendy has said, last year, and I actually need to start with a disclaimer, especially speaking after Dr. Herzog. I have to start, I'm not a medical doctor, so in case you're wondering how I'm going to tell you about all sorts of medical stuff, I will, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm actually an economist. So I'd be much happier if my title said, why Brexit is going to go wrong. I could talk to you about that, but actually talking about medicine is probably not my game, but I've actually been forced down that route. So let me start by just talking a bit about myself and the journey that I'm on. So you'll see this is taken in 2015. Now there's a race that's run every year between Durban and Pietermaritzburg in South Africa. It's called the Comrades Marathon, and it's in memory of all of the soldiers who died, the comrades who died together during the First World War. It was started in the early 1920s, and it's basically run every year alternately between Durban and Pietermaritzburg. It's a bit longer than the London Marathon, so it's 56 miles, so it's 2 marathons and a bit, and you've got 12 hours to run it in. So you start at 5:30 in the morning, you run till 5:30 in the evening, and you run that race. And I've run it a number of times, and it's actually a great journey that one's been on, and running was very much a part of my life and part of who I was. So this is me running the 2015 Comrades. It was the 12th time I ran that race. And I finished with literally about a minute and a half to spare, which on a 12-hour journey is cutting it extremely fine. And the main reason was I actually struggled. I found I just wasn't able to run properly. The last 20 kilometers, I was in agony. My back was in pain. I didn't understand why, and I thought, getting older is just tough. You've got to just keep going. And so I finished that race. The following year, 2016, I decided the reason that I was actually not running as I'd done in the past was clearly training. So I thought if I trained more and trained harder, I'd solve that problem. So I set out earlier, trained more, and literally a week before the race, so the last training run I went out running, and I managed to tear my left thigh muscle. It literally sheared. And I had a week to go. So I did what the sensible thing was to do. So I strapped it up, took high doses of painkillers, and ran the race anyway. And I managed to get all the way to 65 kilometers before my thigh properly tore, and I couldn't walk anymore. So I had to stop at that point. So when it came to 2017, which was last year, I thought clearly now I've got to get back and finish this race. So I trained even more, I trained even harder. And I ran the last qualifying marathon there was. And I went through the first half of the marathon fine. I was on track to finish and qualify. Came the second half, I literally couldn't run anymore. I was walking, but I couldn't get to the pace of running. I just found my hips and back were just too sore. And so I went back to my GP and I said to him, there's a problem here. And I know you've been giving me cortisone. He'd been giving me cortisone injections every 2 weeks. And I carry on running with the cortisone. And he eventually said, I think you should go and see a proper doctor in a hospital, and actually let's find out what's wrong with you. So I went literally from running and training for this marathon to going into hospital on the Monday, very irritated because I had a busy week and I had many things to do and I wasn't actually preparing for a week in hospital. I went in on that Monday. On that Thursday evening, a doctor asked my wife and I to come and sit at the back of the nurse's station in one of the wards with him. And he said something to both of us which was quite a shock. And it's when you get this kind of news, it is literally drives you into a state of shock. And I knew immediately something was wrong because he was red in the face and he was looking uncomfortable. And he sat down and he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but you have lung cancer. And I immediately thought, lung cancer? I've never smoked in my life. How can I possibly have lung cancer? And he said, not only do you have lung cancer, it's spread from your left lung to both of your lungs extensively. And I understood why I couldn't breathe very well running. It's spread to your liver, your hips, your spine, your neck, all 11 of your vertebrae have been affected, and it's spread to your brain. And he said, I'm really sorry to tell you this. My father died of this thing. It's really terrible. You're not going to live very long. Good luck. And he left. And he left us sitting there with the nurses making tea behind him. And I thought and I watched my wife crumple in tears. And I looked at her and I thought about what he'd said, and I thought immediately, no, I don't accept that. That can't be true. I was still running last week. I'm still going to be running this marathon in a month's time. And so he'd set up an appointment for me to go and see an oncologist the next morning. And I thought, this is great, we'll clear this up very quickly. So I sat down and I said, right, show me the data on these scans that you claim was all this wrong with me. And I literally checked. I made her show me that it was actually my name and they were my scans. And after about the 5th version of the scan, I realized this was actually me that they were seeing on the screen. And she was as hopeful as the first doctor that I'd seen. She said to me, this thing is going to kill you. It's going to be a matter of months. I see you have children. I think you should make an appointment with a counselor down the corridor. I suggest you get your affairs in order. I said to her, should I change my diet? Should I stop drinking? I thought, maybe that's all that red wine I drank. I knew there was some problem with it, all that red wine. She said, no, don't worry. Don't change your diet. Carry on drinking wine. There's nothing really you can do. Just enjoy yourself. And so I left from that meeting with her, and I realized there was something seriously now threatening my life. It had gone from me feeling that I was getting older to literally feeling like there was something that was threatening me. And I realized then that in that period that I went through, that shock of realizing what was actually wrong with me, that I had to actually find myself on a very different journey. So I'm going to talk to you today about a journey. It's a literal journey of running, it's a figurative journey of life, and it's about running marathon and what life's actually about. And that's why I've titled my talk, Finding Meaning in Life, because I've spent the last year and a half, firstly, outliving that prognosis. I mean, I was told I wouldn't be around more than a few months. In fact, I was told 8 months. I've not only gone through that 8-month period, but I'm actually doing very well. And I found I've learned a lot on this journey, stuff that I probably would have never learned in my life, because I was too busy in a corporate, chasing after clients and doing things, and kept very busy doing that. So I've spent the last year and a half really learning what life's really important about. And the first thing I kind of realized is that, and I think when you face that kind of news from a doctor and they tell you so emphatically that you're not going to live very long, it does force you into a different space in life. You join a group of people on the edge of life who are experiencing life in a very different way. And what I found very difficult is how doctors could so convincingly tell me that I was going to be dead in a few months, yet had no idea actually who I was, had no idea about what was wrong with me, about what I would do in response. They didn't believe, they didn't have any sense of that. They were quite confident about their view. But I also realized that actually all of us are going to die one day. No one is going. The one thing that is certain about this life is you don't survive it. It catches up with you eventually. Some people, it's when they're younger. Some people, they get literally hit by a bus. Some people, it's cancer, or it's old age. And I think all of us live life deferring to tomorrow, hoping that they'll die in the old age one day. And that's what I kind of had in mind for myself. I pictured myself dying at age 80 in an old age home with my grandchildren coming to visit me that afternoon. And that's what I thought life was about. And then I realized actually that death had come very close. It had suddenly gone from 30 years away to a few months away. And it forced me to actually think very differently about life and how I viewed life and what was really important to me in life itself. And I think the one thing I realized is you have to, when you're faced with this kind of journey, is you have to believe in many things. But what you do have to do is you have to start understanding what you really actually believe in. Because I think it's very easy. We go through life living forward. I spent my life living 3 to 5 years in the future. I was always planning what I was going to do, the next holiday would be, what the next career move would be. I spent little time dwelling on the past because I just moved forward, but I know I spent very little time living in the present. And the one thing I've learned on this journey is I literally live entirely in the present. I live in the day, in the hour, in the minute, and in the moment. It's the one huge lesson that it's taught me, that life isn't about what you're going to do when you retire and putting off things until tomorrow, what you think you're going to do. It's about living right now. The other thing it does do when you're forced with this kind of journey is you've got to understand what you actually believe in. And it's very easy, I think, to go through life believing in your own mortality, believing in actually yourself, believing in many things, but not actually sitting down and saying, what do I actually believe about life? What's important for me? What is really the essence of life? And understanding that very, very clearly. And something that I think is lost for many of us as we go through this hustle of life and as this journey of life, we forget that actually life is a very precious thing that one has. We don't know how long we have in it, but it's actually, and one thing I have learned over the last year is to live with joy. That might sound odd, when doctors have told you that you're not going to live very long, you're going to live a few months, you'd think, hang on, that is actually not a very joyful statement, it's not very pleasant. But what I have learned on this journey, and I've come across many other cancer patients, is getting a diagnosis of a terminal illness changes you in one of two ways. You're never the same again, that I'm certain of. You either become bitter or you become better. You become better or you become bitter. And I've come across many people who are bitter about life and what it's led them to. But what you can do, and you can actually do that, is you can become better. You can become a better person. You can live life very differently. And it's a very cathartic impact that it does have on your life. But what you can do is actually find joy in the moment, in the presence, in the actual hour and minute. I think what it also shows, and it highlights some very clearly, and I've read a lot of accounts now, and certainly read Viktor Frankl's book, is what you realize in life is that if you have something to live for, you can outlive a lot of doctors' recommendations or even their prognoses. You have to believe in something, yes, but you have to have a reason to live. And that reason to live had sat before me for most of my life. I just couldn't see it that clearly. But it took the time that I spent not working in a corporate, not rushing around all over Africa trying to start businesses for other people, to spending the time with my family and spending the time getting to know my wife again, getting to know our children in much more detail. And that's what I've spent really the last year and a half doing. And it is somewhat sad that modern humans have become so enamored with materialism and all the things we chase in life that we actually lose sight of probably the most important thing that we ever have, which is our close family, our close friends that are sitting right around us. And so I learned that quite early on this journey. And I think that goes to really what is life's about, is finding the actual meaning of life. It's not about what might happen. It's not about the future. It's about living now and living joyfully in the present with your family, with your friends. It's a very simple thing. Believing where you are in life, believing what you understand in life. I said to you earlier that you have to have a belief. I struggle to understand that we as complex animals, with the intellect that we have and all the abilities we have, are not able to actually fully understand that actually, and what I did, and it became very clear. It forced me to reevaluate my own thinking. Now, what it led me to the conclusion of is that I went from a very nominal Christian. I kind of thought it's something I'd worry about later in life. I'd get back to it when it kind of worked. I was forced to actually sit down and say, well, if you only have a few months left, what are you going to think about? Where are you going to be at the end of your life? And it forced me to refocus and recommit myself mentally to committing myself back into Christianity. Now, I'm not saying that's the answer for everybody. That might be my answer. Your answer might be entirely different. You might believe in something else. But what it led me to believe is you have to believe in something. Because if you simply believe that we're on earth, we simply just live this life and die eventually, it's a pretty shallow way of living life. And so I found in this thinking that I went through an incredible meaning in what life is actually about. Now, I don't want you to sit here thinking that I became all soft and gentle in my old age and didn't realize that this thing that was attacking me was a threat to my life. And I took that threat very seriously. I realized I wasn't going to sit around, listen to what the doctors have told me. I was going to actually spend my time actually fighting this fight. And it is a battle that you're on. You realize life is a complex process that we're going through, but when your life is threatened like that, you have to do a number of things. You've got to think quite clearly about how it's going to do it. And I realized very early on, and it's quite interesting, and you only realize this when you're in the position you are, when doctors are quite confidently giving you a prognosis like that, that you're actually fighting three things. You're fighting the disease itself, which can quite kill you in its own way in a short time. But you're also fighting a medical system, and you heard from Dr. Herzog earlier about this narrow view of doctors who operate a system. It's designed to protect that system. It's not designed to protect you as the individual patient. It has no interest in your long-term survival. You might, your family might, but it's a system that operates. The third part of that system is the medical health system, and whether it's a public healthcare system like the NHS or a private healthcare system like we have in South Africa, that system, the moment you're diagnosed with a terminal illness, you become a liability to that system. They don't want you there anymore because you become a cost center. You go from being an asset where you're paying every month into that system to suddenly drawing down on it. I've seen calculations where they reckon in Europe that governments will spend about $60,000 to $100,000 to save a patient's life. Beyond that, they're not interested. In a medical aid system, I think it's less than that because they don't want you around claiming on the system too much. So you've got to actually work out how you're dealing with all three of those systems. The disease itself, dealing with the doctors, dealing with the medical health insurance system that sits around it, which and at times you're left wondering, are they actually after their own interests or they actually whose interests come first? And it's often not the patient. Now, you heard from Dr. Herzog earlier about mental state, and I firmly believe in this. I don't know if you're aware of Stephen Jay Gould, who's probably one of the best biologists Britain ever produced, probably I'd say second to Charles Darwin, who was also diagnosed with a terminal lung condition in 1982. He lived for 20 years. And a lot of it he ascribed down to his mental state, that he simply just did not believe the doctors. He believed that he could not outwit life indefinitely, because nobody can, but he believed that he could influence the outcome positively by what he believed in. And I'm a very strong believer in that view. I think, again, this notion that you've got to passively accept this judgment on your life is not true. I mean, we weren't given all these mental faculties and abilities to understand things without applying them in enormous detail. And so one of the things that I set out to do is say, well, how do I increase the odds on this? How do I actually make this battle that I'm now facing more skewed in my favor? And one of the things that I did is I got very tired of this notion of the medical system that kept telling me that you're terminally ill, that this thing is incurable, there's nothing we can do to save you. And so in February this year, I had dinner with my wife. We were planning our 25th wedding anniversary, and I said to her that week I'd received a letter from my medical insurers, and they declared me permanently disabled. So that car parked in the disabled bay outside there is me. I'm actually qualified to park in disabled bays. Of course I don't, because I don't want old ladies hitting me on the head, because I don't look like I should be in the disabled bay. And I said to her when we were having that dinner, I just don't accept this view anymore. I'm not prepared to accept this notion that one can be incurably terminally ill. I accept that things are incurable, but my aim is I think one's got to fight, even in your own way, to convert it into some kind of chronic condition. And so that's what I set out to do. I thought, well, and how am I going to do this? So I'm going to talk a lot now about the actual treatment options that I've followed. And I should start by saying the first thing that I did is I went back to the oncologist who I'd been recommended to, and I said to her, thank you very much for seeing me, but I don't think I'm going to be seeing you again. I think I need to find another oncologist. So I set out to interview oncologists. Now, oncologists are not used to this. They are doctors who think that you should be lucky that you can see them. I went to interview them, and I asked them 5 questions, and I said, based on your answers, I'm going to decide whether we can work together. And so the first question I asked is, if you were in my position, would you believe in hope? And I forced them to actually say what they believed in. And so the second thing I said is, are you at the top of your game? Do you know what's going on about lung cancer? Are you on top of your game? Thirdly, are you going to international conferences and actually finding out what's actually happening in this discipline? Or are you simply doing what the drug chemical rep gives you the week before? The fourth thing I said to them is, are you prepared to work as a member of a team? In other words, you're not in charge. We're going to work together, and are you prepared to do that? And the fifth question, which really made them struggle, I said, what do you believe in? What's your view on life? And I made them tell me what they believed in. And so on the basis of that, I chose 2 oncologists in Cape Town, very different oncologists. In fact, one of them is a guy called Rainier Frulin. And when I went to meet him, because he wanted to know, why do you want to meet me? And I sat with him and asked him the questions, and he said, but why do you want me as your oncologist? And I said, because you've got a German name. Even though he's South African, I said, because I know Germans are very thorough people. They're very detailed. And so he continuously reminds me, and I put him under pressure with that now. He's got to live up to what his name carried. So I chose Rainier Frulin. I chose another oncologist in a different practice, Redmond Nell. I chose an oncologist in Denver, Colorado, a guy called Ross Camage, who's probably one of the top 5 lung cancer experts in the world. I included Dr. Herzog in my team, so he's on the team as well. And I consult widely with that team. So every time one of the oncologists recommends something, I check that with everyone else. I make sure that I'm not simply passively accepting what they tell me to do. Because the first point there about the conventional standard of care, and I've realized, is you're in a system called the standard of care. And that standard of care will quite happily kill you, because it's basically self-protecting. It's designed to go through the motions. It diagnoses. It gives you treatments like radiation, chemotherapy. It does all of these things, but it's a self-preserving, self-sustaining system. And I realized very early on, if I simply followed that system and did what it told me to do, I don't think I'd still be around. In fact, I know I wouldn't have been, because I've actually seen how it kind of operates. And doctors cannot go outside that system. If they do, they lose their licenses, they'll lose their businesses, they lose their livelihood. So they stick to that system. It gives them the comfort that they know that they're following that system. And the one thing I've learned about doctors is they're trained to follow the rules. They're not trained to act like mavericks. The advantage I had is I had a vested interest in being completely maverick about this. And so I basically set out to actually challenge that standard of care system. So I actually don't do anything that they tell me to do. I follow what they advise, but I don't do it. So I had to go and, in May this year, I had to go and have some biopsies done on some of the lymph nodes in my neck. And I sat with a specialist surgeon, and he said, right, tell me what treatment you've had. And I listed everything I'd been doing. And he said to my wife and I, well, so who's in charge of your treatment? And I kept quiet because I didn't want to say, and then my wife said, well, he is. And he said, what do you mean, you run your own treatment? So I said, yes, I actually decide what I'm going to do. The oncologists, yes, have to write the prescriptions, but I do everything myself. And he was amazed. He said, I've never come across someone like you who's prepared to actually run your own treatment. And I said, well, that's what I am going to do. And so he's asked me to keep in contact with him because he's curious now. He's not met someone who just doesn't follow the rules in the system, and I don't. And so the one thing I've learned, the standard of care is very helpful. It's got some amazing drugs in it, some immunotherapy. I'm on some checkpoint inhibitors that actually work really well, but they have a limited time frame. And on their own, I don't think they'll work. And again, you come to the role of the pharmaceutical companies. They're also producing drugs that are designed to sort of keep you alive and to treat you and perhaps cure you. But actually, they have their own vested interest, which is to sell them at very high prices. That's how they make money. The second thing is supplements. You heard Dr. Herzog speak about them. And one of the things, interestingly, and I've been twice now in his clinic doing hypothermia, actually, is the first thing he did when I met him is he tested my blood for a whole lot of different deficiencies. And I found out I was deficient in a whole lot of things. And I assumed that I'd eaten a really healthy diet. I was very fit. I ran a lot. That my diet wasn't deficient in anything. And we found out I was deficient in vitamin D. It was virtually very low. In fact, most people, and I'm sure it's true in the UK because it's not very sunny, as you can see out here, have vitamin D deficiencies. Even in South Africa, we're taught not to go in the sun because you don't want to get skin cancer, but you end up vitamin D deficient. So we found out that there were a whole lot of things that I was deficient in magnesium, calcium, zinc, vitamin D. So I started immediately on all those supplements. And a strange thing then happened. You'll probably gather I'm got a very sort of balding head. Suddenly my hair started growing again. It was quite unusual. I realized that actually I went from being sort of really bald to just partially bald. But I think from the supplements. So I'm on a very strict range of supplements. The second thing is repurposed drugs. Now, what's really interesting is that the pharmaceutical companies will invent drugs that are designed to use in one way. They'll get it registered in that way. They won't then use it in another way. Because the problem is there's no incentive for them to do that. They can't charge for it. It's normally out of its patent. It doesn't have any impact, and I think you're going to hear from Jane McLennan later about different drugs and supplements. So I'm on a whole range of supplements, and in addition, a whole range of repurposed drugs. And the way I approach that is also very strict. You heard from Dr. Herzog that somebody was on 250 tablets. I think I'm only on 16. But what I do is every single thing that I come across, I sit down and go through and read up on it because there is a lot of rubbish, as he showed you, out there. That's stuff that doesn't work, and you can spend it, and a lot of it is very expensive. So I go through and check, is there some scientific evidence behind this? And I read it myself. The second thing is it likely to have some impact? What are the negative side effects? So there are things that are actually very good that I've rejected because of side effects, because they affect quality of life and health eventually. Does it mean I'm going to end up spending time away? So, going to some obscure clinic in the Himalayas is very interesting, but to spend 6 months there kind of defeats the purpose of me finding meaning by spending time with my family and children. So I reject those. And what do they cost? There are a lot of these treatments around that are very, very expensive, and you've got to decide, are they worth it? And so using those criteria, I've actually come up with a list of drugs that I follow. So it includes things like mebendazole, which is a worm tablet. I now take enough worm tablet. What I can tell you, I don't have any worms. I take what the dosage you're meant to take every 6 months, twice a day. And again, what they found is that the same mechanism that the actual tablet and the mechanism that kills the cells of the hookworm by breaking down the cells has exactly the same action on the cancer cell. It breaks down the cell wall. So I've taken a whole lot of these other treatments. Many of them have been around thousands of years. Like mistletoe you heard about earlier. There's curcumin. There's a whole lot of that's known as turmeric. So I'm on high-dose turmeric. Now the other thing that's very interesting that I've realized, and I haven't listed it here, but you heard about diet earlier. I'm a great proponent of diet, so I'm on a very strict organic, low-meat diet. I started it out probably too strictly. I had to change it in time because I lost too much body weight and body muscle. So I brought back a lot more protein into that diet. But I do think our diets are compromised. The modern farm food that we're eating, and I know this because we run a farming company, are simply not adequate for what we need in terms of food. Their nutrient status is being compromised by the way they're farmed, and I think there's pesticide and chemical residue in all of that food that we just don't even know about. We don't even know what impact it has on us. So I eat a very, very strict diet. The other topic which is really important is I realized that sleep is a huge issue. I think we've been trained as in the sort of Western world, and I was really proud of that. When I was working in a corporate environment, if I slept more than 5 hours a night, I thought I was being lazy. You know, you went to bed, you slept, you got up, you worked. I now sleep 8 hours a day because there's a lot of evidence showing that sleeping between 7 and 8 hours a day, getting proper sleep, has a huge impact on your body and how it responds. And so I now take melatonin, very high dose melatonin, which virtually, so if I go to bed at night, I'm fast asleep very quickly. And what it's shown is melatonin is very good in dealing with brain tumors. So to slightly pause on the journey, so you'll remember I told you in June last year I had 6 brain tumors. In May this year, by the time they'd done the scans, they've gone. And I don't know whether it was the treatment I was on, whether it was the melatonin, but certainly the melatonin, I'm going to carry on taking it. You do have to accept, though, that regularly at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I literally fall asleep. But I think people have got used to that now. But what it does do is show you that these repurposed drugs can work. And there's lots of evidence in the literature showing that very clearly. So I've been very big on repurposed drugs and the impact that they can have. I've spent a lot of time researching them. Interesting that what I've done is, the next ones that I'm looking at, and I'm very interested, Dr. Herzog mentioned mushrooms. I think there's a whole lot of evidence. So I've been listening to and reading up on mushrooms. But I spend a lot of time researching it before I add it to the treatment regime. I'm too reluctant to just add things if I'm not 100% sure they're going to work. But that is a huge role there in terms of repurposed drugs. And then alternate treatments. The main one, and I spent quite a bit of time researching all these places that offer alternate treatments. And the main one I was actually interested in is in hypothermia, which coincidentally Dr. Herzog spoke about earlier. I mean, hypothermia has been around for 5,000 years. It was used by the Romans. They used to heat rocks up, wrap them in towels, and put them on wounded soldiers to try and heal them. So it's not something we invented earlier. It's not a flaky new thing. It's been around for quite a long time. So I've been twice, as I said, to Dr. Herzog's clinic in October last year and then again in June this year, and gone through rounds of local hypothermia. I couldn't take the whole body hypothermia that he initially we spoke about because the tablets I was taking made my skin hypersensitive. So I took the localized hypothermia along with the sort of low-dose chemo at the same time, ozone, and I believe it has an impact. I mean, there's a lot of scientific evidence showing that it does heat the mechanism which it works is a normal cell can be heated up to 42, 43 degrees. A cancer cell cannot survive over 41.3 degrees. So the moment you heat the tissue temperature up to that level, the cells start dying. And you saw the pictures. I was amazed at some of those photographs that he showed of remission in cancer patients related to hypothermia. It also can travel, those microwaves can travel up to 30 centimeters through your body. So you can actually treat tumors at quite great depth using it. So that was the very big alternate treatment that I kind of followed. And one has to be careful doing that. There are many people all over the world operating these treatments. There's many flaky stuff, as he showed you. But again, I spend a lot of time contacting people who've been to these treatments, getting references from them, checking what it worked, checking the data before I commit to following it. Then there's actually this sort of interesting beyond, what I call beyond current paradigms. And this is where I'm amazed at how the pharmaceutical industry works. Because what is interesting is many of these cancers actually overlap genetically. So the type of lung cancer that I have is called EGFR, epidural growth factor receptor positive. It typically affects young Asian women, which you can see I fit the bill quite clearly. So I'm a kind of unusual in that grouping. But actually, EGFR is linked to 5 other different types of cancer, to pancreatic, colon, stomach, rectal. It's linked to other cancers. Yet all of the drug development, so for lung cancer, follows a different route pathway. So one of the things that I've been researching is taking drugs that are already approved and available. So there's a drug called cetuximab and Herceptin, which you saw earlier on Dr. Herzog's talk, which have been approved for colorectal and neck cancer, and I'm looking to add those. When I first mentioned this to my oncology team, they were horrified. They said, "You can't take that stuff. We're not licensed to give it to you." I said, "Well, we need to talk about this." And so what I've done is done a whole lot of research. I found out that there's actually, interestingly, Israel, which is a source of very good research on cancer treatment. There's a professor and a doctor in Israel using the same technique. And what it's aiming to try and do is convert this from an incurable to a chronic condition. And the only way that's going to happen is adding all these combinations together and being really innovative about the treatment options. The advantage I have is I'm happy to try these things. So I recently tried what's called pulsing with a drug called afatinib. So the drug I'm on at the moment is called Tagrisso, but what I've done is there's a lot of evidence showing that if you take 2 of these drugs at the same time and you take one consistently, the tumors get used to that constant dosing, and then they mutate and carry on growing. And that you can actually pulse these different drugs. But again, there's little evidence of it. There's some patient studies, but there's not a lot of evidence showing that this works yet. But I thought, I've got nothing to lose. So I've been pulsing with a fat nib. It made me really sick, so I then realized I had to take a break. But these things can work. So there's two avenues I'm looking at in these, is looking at really beyond the current paradigms of medical treatment. It's looking at other drugs that can be used. And looking at taking the research that's been applied there. So I've been working very closely with researchers in this area, looking at these different treatment options, talking directly to the researchers and saying what can work and then how to use it. And this, again, when you talk to conventional oncologists, they don't even think about that, because they've been trained to think that if you have lung cancer, this is the pathway you use, and you follow that route very, very closely. And then the last part is about experimental treatments. I also realized that the rate of current medical development is very strong in oncology products. In fact, the number of papers being published on lung cancer is growing exponentially. There's an enormous amount of research going on because lung cancer is so common. It's actually the most commonly caught kind of lung cancer. People think breast cancer is very common, but lung cancer is actually more related to smoking often. But the biggest growth in lung cancer now is non-smokers, particularly in Asia and particularly amongst women, such that 1 in 15 men and 1 in 16 women will get lung cancer in their lives. It's actually becoming a big problem. I only found this out as I started researching it. Until I heard about this, I had no idea about lung cancer, and I didn't think I'd ever get it. And so there's a lot of treatments that are available now, but I realized where I'm sitting now, I either got this thing at exactly the right time or exactly the wrong time. So I had to look beyond current scientific paradigms. And so what I then did is looked, and I spent some time when I was in Germany in October last year. I went up to Düsseldorf and met with a Professor Boger, who's a professor of oncology at the University of Düsseldorf. We went and met him. My wife and I spent about an hour and a half sitting with him, and he told us about the approach that he's following. I then got in touch with a whole lot of other patients who'd been on it, and he's treated a number of patients in it, but he hasn't gathered enough data yet to publish any of it, and I think that's his next step. So I got him to develop a personalized peptide vaccine that is very specific to my tumor DNA. So one of the big advances is that we've uncovered the human genome. So the movement to personalized medicine is happening very quickly. And I think the future of cancer is actually identifying, because cancer is different in every person. It's genetically different. This isn't some infection like malaria or HIV that's come from outside your body. It's your body attacking itself. And they've developed this approach to do that. So they take samples of your blood and the tumor. They basically develop this personalized vaccine. I then get it administered by Professor Jaeger at the University of Frankfurt, or at Krankenhaus Nordwest Hospital. So I've been traveling back and forth. I've just come this week for the 10th round of the vaccine in Frankfurt. So I've spent more time in Frankfurt in my retired state than I ever did in my business state flying there from London. But what I wanted to show you, and this is very interesting data. So Professor Jaeger has treated 20 patients using Professor Boger's vaccine, 4 of them being lung cancer. It is applied to all different types of cancer. So if you look carefully here in the blue, you can see that was what my immune response was at the outset. So the baseline in March this year, it looks a bit like votes for Hillary Clinton and then Donald Trump in the presidential election, the right colors. But that, after 6 rounds of the vaccine, is the immune response. So there's the different peptides. There were 3 short and 3 long peptides, and there's the combination cocktail, and that's the T-cell response. Okay, this is in a test tube, so it's not in the body, but one's got to assume there's a correlation between those red bars and how it's working. And I think this is the future of cancer treatment, is actually these very personalized vaccines. At the moment, they're unproven, but there are a whole lot of clinical trials, so the big pharma companies are now researching this. So Roche is running a clinical trial at the moment using a selection of these peptides. So what they've worked out is choose the common ones, just inject them into people, and it'll have an effect. This approach is very different because it's actually taking specific peptides and using it in your body in a particular way. And it has huge merit. And so I don't know if it'll work, but it's certainly worth it. I believe it was worth a try, and it was worth seeing whether it actually worked. So I think this whole journey that I've spoken to you about does actually force you to approach life differently. It does force you to, when you're facing down death as closely as I was led to believe and seeing it daily, you realize that actually, you've got to actually face this thing with some measure of courage. I think life involves courage, but when you're fighting this close to the edge, there's an element of courage that you have to follow. You have to be prepared to actually toughen this out. It actually is just simply what it is. You either, as I said to you earlier, you either allow this to make you better or much worse as a person, and you've got to choose. Unfortunately, you've got to choose, and you've got to decide what that is, and you've got to move forward with that. The second thing is you've got to actually find strength in that adversity. It's not an easy journey. Going along this journey and understanding how one's life has become is actually a challenging thing to do. But I think what's interesting in life is you can spend time unhappy or uncomfortable. I think there are many people in that position of what their life has become. Or you can simply say, this is what my life has become. It's not what you imagine or what you would have liked necessarily, but you've got to then fight it forward. You've got to basically carry on going. You've got to actually decide this is the approach that you're going to follow, and you've got to stick with it. And it does require some strength to do that. And coming back to this point about is you have to believe in hope. I mean, there is, the one thing that we as humans have the ability to do is to actually believe in hope and not listen to doctors who tell you that you haven't got very long to live, not listen to those prognoses. It's very interesting is I read recently a paper that Stephen Jay Gould wrote, and he died in 2002, talking about how the shape of the distribution curve. And in June last year, when I sat with those doctors, and even the oncology team that I had said, you've got a medium survival time of 8 months. With your condition, you'll live for another 8 months. The medium survival time is 8 months. Now, the problem with the median survival time is that means that half of the people have lived less than 8 months and half of the people have lived more than 8 months. The median survival time is 8 months. But my question was, well, what is the size of the tail? What does the right-hand curve look like? Because that's what I'm interested in. So looking back 5 years ago, the 5-year survival rate of lung cancer was 5%. It's now with modern treatments gone to 15%. But my question to them is, well, what do I have to do to be in the 15%? I'm not interested in the median or the left side of it. And I've already bypassed the median by a long way, actually. I'm more interested in what does it take? How do you get into that 15%? And that's where my focus lies, not in... And he understood that as well. He realized that your mind was a pretty powerful thing, that you can actually deploy it very effectively. You can actually use it to try and work out. And the reality is, I don't know if I'll get into that 15%, but I don't really mind, because what it's allowed me to do is live as if I'm going to be in the 15%, not live as if I'm not going to be around in 5 years' time. It allows myself to live enjoying every day with the view that I'm going to live for a long time, because otherwise the alternative is to go into that bitter negative space that is not very helpful at all in life. So I'm going to come back to the week I got that letter in February where my medical insurer wrote to me and said, we finally diagnosed or designated you as disabled. You don't have to work again. They're going to carry on paying me for as long as I live, which I thought was going to be a costly experience for them, but I'm pleased about that. I'd also been told by all of the doctors, even in my team, that given the fact that 11 of my 12 vertebrae had been hollowed out, that I should give up running, I should give up kayaking. And so I stopped doing all of those. When I got that letter, I ran a park run. That's not that park run. I ran a park run that Saturday morning, having not run for nearly 8 months. I ran in 33 minutes, slower than I would have run it before, but still a reasonable time. And I told our sons that evening when I got home, I said, load the kayaks onto the roof. I'm going kayaking tomorrow morning. And I told definitely no kayaking, because kayaking is very hard on your body. You're getting pounded by waves at sea. And so I went out with our third son, Cameron, and he and I went out to sea. We went out on that Saturday morning. And about a month later, this is taken down along the Cape Coast, he and I went out to sea on kayaks. And while we were sitting out on the sea, I was out on my own on the kayaks. I was sitting there just enjoying the view over a reef in about 6 meters of water. I got bumped by a 4-meter great white. Now, when a great white comes and bumps you, the next thing is they're going to come and eat your kayak and you're alongside it. And again, part of me was, you do get a primordial fear when this enormous, you're sitting on the water with this distance between you and a shark and it's bumping the bottom of the kayak. It does drive your primordial fear of what's going to happen to you. And I thought, you know what, I'm not bothered. I don't actually fear death anymore. The shark can eat me if it wants to, and it chose not to. But I started kayaking again. I've started running again. So one of the things that's very interesting on that journey is that, in some ways, Comrades Marathon as such has formed an enormous part of my life. It's been around. I've been running that race for nearly 20 years. I realized that actually it's a very similar parallel to running Comrades about life. The interesting thing is when you start the Comrades Marathon, you have no idea what it's going to be like during the race, and it gets tough. The last 20 kilometers can only be described as brutal. Your body is telling you to stop. Your mind has to carry you on. But you don't know if you're going to finish until they give you that medal at the end. But what I realized on this journey, this figurative comrades that I'm running, I can't actually lose this battle. I mean, I actually got the medal already. Because if you let cancer beat you mentally, then you've lost already. It might take my body in this process, but it certainly won't. I'm not going to allow it to take my mind in the process. So I'm comfortable that on this comrades that I'm now running, I'm actually have got the medal already. I think the medal has been awarded to me. I just have to get to the end of the race. I don't have to worry about getting it. What is interesting is I watched last year, I went to the start of the Comrades Marathon, and I dropped off those guys you saw in the picture, the three of them. In fact, they all live in Sevenoaks in Kent. They're my sort of running buddies here. And they ran Comrades, and I met them at the finish. And I was very nostalgic that I wasn't going to be able to run Comrades again. And then I saw at the end a guy with one leg coming in on an artificial leg, and they'd given him 3 hours extra to run the race. And they said to and I watched him finish. And I thought, you know what? If a guy with one leg can run the race and they give him another 3 hours, I'm going to run the race again next year. I don't think I can finish in 12 hours because I've only got 30% lung capacity left. But in 15 hours, I think I could well. So I've written to the race director and I've said, guess what? I want you to put on the disabled comrades, and I'm going to run it to raise funds for lung cancer. And he didn't reply to me because I think it's a difficult question to ask someone. I mean, it's changing his entire race. So I sent him a message last week and said, you haven't replied. I'm assuming you got this email. And he said, I'm having to think about it. I'll get back to you. But what I realized is even if he says no, I'm going to run it anyway. So, either I can run officially or I'll run unofficially, but I am going to run the race. And I think that's what I've learned on this journey. I mean, it's been an interesting journey. It's not the journey I thought I would lead in life. So I leave you with three kind of questions as I close. And they are for me quite important. When you're in your life, the question, and I've learned to think very hard about the answers to these, is what are you doing with the talents in your life? I think many people are living their lives, living different lives, working in places they don't really enjoy, doing things they don't necessarily enjoy, but they have unique talents. What are you doing with those talents that you've been given? Are you deploying them in the right way? Are they using them appropriately? The second thing is when you get to the end of your life, and we will all get to that point, and you'll be lying there knowing that your life's going to end. It might be short in some of our cases, it might be longer, and hopefully it is in everyone else's case much longer. But when you get to that end of your life, what are your friends and family going to remember you for? Are they going to remember you for the job that you had, for all the money that you earned, for the trust fund you've left them, for the property, the second home that you had in France? Or they're going to remember you for what you actually meant to them, what you taught them, what you were in your life? That's what's really more important. And the third thing, and I come back to this thing about belief, is I simply don't believe that we were created to live on this planet. We were born and we simply die and disappear. That I believe firmly, and that's my view, that we existed, we spent time on this earth, and how we live it is really important, and then we live in eternity thereafter. The question is, which I think you need to think about, where will you spend eternity? So thank you very much for listening to me today.
Well, thank you, Grant. That was inspirational, really. I was with Stacey when you were diagnosed with that, and one of your sons was actually staying and didn't know that you had it. And to see you now standing there is absolutely a complete joy. And would you share with the story you told me just now about the doctor you saw recently?
Okay, I hadn't meant to include that into my talk, but I was telling Wendy earlier, I was going to the hospital for some tests, and I saw the surgeon who had confidently told me I wasn't going to live very long, standing in the corridor chatting to one of his colleagues. So I waited till they finished speaking, and I went up to him and I said, "Hello, doctor, how are you?" And he looked a bit puzzled. So I said, "You don't remember, you do?" And he said, "No, I don't remember you." I said, "You're the guy that you saw in June last year. You told me that this thing was going to kill me and it would be a matter of months. But I just wanted to tell you that I'm still around and I'm doing very well." And he literally reacted like he'd seen a ghost. He literally jumped backwards, stood there, because in his mind, he was so confident of his medical output, he just couldn't accept mentally that there was someone standing in front of him telling him he'd been wrong. And then he quickly excused himself and rushed off down the corridor.
Now, if anyone would like a question with Grant?
Thank you so much.
Just one second.
Such an amazing
Thank you.
and inspiring speech. And so much that you said resonated with me, and I just love that whole warrior-like mindset that you have is incredible. The one question I wanted to ask you is whether you'd come across anything called Caris molecular intelligence and whether you've ever thought of using that in your treatment.
I've read about it briefly, but I haven't. The challenge I've found is when you're trying to read on so many things, I've got a long list of stuff I haven't got to, and that sits in that list. But I know I haven't read it carefully. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it carefully.
Okay. I know it's not covered on insurance, but I know it's, in my own experience, it's something that's been said to me as something that I definitely should do, because it's where it can give the oncologists a smarter way of treating cancer with the right drugs. But I just was keen to know if you knew about it.
No, I haven't looked at that specifically. One of the things I've been working on, and I'm meeting some people next week, because I think one of the problems oncologists have is they follow a very structured approach to treatment, and it's very linear. And I think given there's so many people with different types of cancers, you can actually quite easily capture a lot of data from those people, especially from countries like South Korea and Norway that have, and probably the NHS, but they don't gather it. The Asian countries gather data a lot better. Is you can actually then build a model to actually say, with these conditions, what is the recommended treatment approach you follow? Rather than just have your oncologist sit there and look at the scans and say, well, let's try this and let's follow this. That you actually can develop a much more intelligent approach, including other drugs and all sorts of other treatment options that doesn't exist currently. And that's what is amazing, that given the scale of the threat to cancer to our society, that no one has actually spent the effort to build that. But I found a company that's working in India on developing it. Meeting one of the owners next week to try and see if it would work. But I think that's where the answer does lie, in trying to understand the whole treatment approach in much more detail than just using drugs and seeing what happens afterward, measuring over a 3-monthly scale. It's a 30-year-old approach, which doesn't seem to make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I was just wondering, do you put any of your stuff online, or do you write stuff? Is it available?
No, I haven't actually put any of it online. What I am doing is converting this talk, because I've given different versions of this talk a number of times. I'm going to convert it into a book.
Okay. Because you've obviously done lots of research, you still do that, and it's very time consuming, and it's about how you can share some of your expertise and knowledge.
No, you're very right. Yeah. One of the things I was concerned about is I think there are many people who do what I'm doing and research a lot, and then they're not around, and then that research is lost. So I'm working with a group it's called the EGFR Supergroup. You have a whole lot of researchers. You have to kind of apply to join this group. It's not easy to get into, because you've got to be an active researcher and contribute to the group. And what we're doing is putting together a database of all of these treatments. And once it's up and running, we'll make it publicly available. Okay. We wanted people to be able to get access to this research. So I'm working, the guy who's running it is based in Cambridge. So we've been working on that. But you're exactly right, to share all this information with people who want to use. The reason many people don't do that is because they're worried about the legal liability if people take things and then get ill or die. So we'll simply share it as these are a list of drugs and treatment options, and let people make the decision. So it won't come with any recommendations.
It's really interesting. Thank you for your talk. In terms of other cancers, obviously you've researched with lung cancer, but how transferable do you think the research that you've done for yourself is to, for example, breast cancer or bowel cancer? Or
I think it's very transferable. I think the actual standard of care drug treatments might vary, but everything around it is perfectly transferable, I think. And in fact, I think because a lot of cancers overlap in terms of their treatment options, I think you can even overlap those as well. So I think it's very transferable. Those vaccines, for example, work on all cancers, not just lung.
But you have to get your right.
But you've got to get the exact specific one for your cancer type.
Okay, thank you so much, Grant.
Thanks,
that was
Renee.
wonderful.
Okay.